The key went halfway into the new brass lock and stopped. I tried it again, slower this time, though I had opened that workshop door nearly every morning for 26 years. The lock was clean and bright against the old gray metal. Mine was not the key for it. Through the window beside the door, I could see a strip of orange cardboard tied to the steering wheel of a tractor that belonged to Calvin Reed. The number 17 had been written across it in black marker. 2 more orange tags hung from machines farther back in the shop. My son Darren pulled into the gravel lot before I finished calling him. He stepped out with his hands already raised, as if I had accused him of something. "Dad, the insurance company wanted the locks changed and the equipment listed. I was going to explain it." I asked him for a key. He looked toward the road instead of at me. "Let me handle the shop for a few days. You are still favoring that hand." My hand had healed months earlier. I held it out, palm up. "The key, Darren?" "Nicole has the copies," he said. "She did the inventory over the weekend." Nicole was my daughter-in-law. She had never repaired a tractor, written a work order, or asked permission to enter the building after hours. I pointed through the window at the orange tag on the tractor from Calvin. "That machine does not belong to us." Darren said the tags were only for insurance. Then he told me not to make trouble in the parking lot, though the parking lot belonged to me too. I left before anger made the decision for me. At home, a white envelope from the county sat crooked inside my mailbox. A yellow forwarding label covered the address. The original destination was the office of Darren Mercer Transport. Inside was a notice stating that the workshop property had unpaid taxes and was scheduled for county auction unless the balance was cleared within 3 weeks. I read the date twice. The lock had been changed 4 days before the county mailed the notice. Darren had kept me outside before I knew there was anything inside worth losing. I laid the county notice on my kitchen table and called Darren before I took off my work coat. He answered on the 4th ring. I told him the property taxes were 7 months behind and the county had set an auction date. There was a pause long enough for me to hear a truck backing up somewhere near him. "Dad, that cannot be right. Those payments were supposed to come out automatically." They had never come out automatically. I had paid the tax bill twice a year for as long as I owned the shop. I reminded him of that. He said I must have forgotten changing the arrangement after I hurt my hand. The injury had happened the previous winter. A steel housing slipped while I was lowering it onto a bench and caught 2 fingers against the edge. Nothing broke, but the swelling kept me from writing checks for several weeks. Darren offered to handle the utility payments and deposit customer checks until I could use the hand again. I had given him access to the business account and the county payment page. I had not given him the property. I asked why the county mailed the notice to the office used by his transport company. He said he changed the address so important papers would not sit in my mailbox while I was recovering. Then why did this one sit in your office long enough to need a forwarding label? He told me Nicole handled the mail now. He said she probably missed it. I looked at the date printed near the top of the notice. The county had mailed it 2 days earlier. The forwarding label had been applied that morning. Nobody had missed anything yet. I told Darren I was going to the county office. He said there was no reason to drive all the way into town. He could take care of it. I asked him how. He spoke more carefully then. "We may need to work out a payment plan. The shop has not been bringing in what it used to. That is why Nicole started listing the equipment. We need to know what is there before we decide what makes sense." The shop had 6 repair jobs waiting. 2 customers had already paid deposits. The tractor marked with the orange number belonged to Calvin. None of those facts required Nicole to decide what made sense. I told Darren to bring me a key before noon. He said he had a delivery problem and could not leave the yard. I hung up. The county treasurer office occupied the 1st floor of an old brick building near the courthouse. I arrived before 10 and carried the notice inside in a plain folder. A woman named Marcia Keene called me to her desk. She wore reading glasses on a chain and spoke in the patient voice people use when they expect an older man to be confused. I handed her my identification and the notice. She entered the parcel number, then looked at the screen longer than I expected. The amount was not impossible. It was serious, but I had enough between the business reserve and the value of a tractor I had restored for myself. The larger problem was the time. I had 19 days before the county could move forward with the sale. Marcia printed the balance and placed it in front of me. I asked for the payment history. She turned the screen slightly so I could see it. The last complete payment had been made the previous spring. 2 later installments showed no payment at all. I asked whether the account had ever been set for automatic withdrawal. She checked another page. No, sir. There has never been an automatic payment instruction on this parcel. I read the sentence on the screen twice, even though I had heard her clearly. I asked about the mailing address. Marcia opened a history window. The current address was the office used by Darren Mercer, Transport. Before that, every notice had gone to my home. I asked when it changed. She gave me a date from 7 months earlier. That was 3 weeks after I hurt my hand. I asked who requested the change. She said the online system did not show a full name, only the account login and the confirmation method. The request came through the access I had authorized. A confirmation code had been sent to the mobile number on the account. The number ended with the same 4 digits as the phone carried by Darren. Marcia must have noticed my expression, because her voice lost the patient softness. "Do you want the address changed back today?" I said yes. She printed a form and watched me sign it. My hand worked fine. I also asked her to remove every contact number except mine. She did that while I stood at the desk. Then I asked whether the auction date could be stopped if I paid the full balance before the deadline. She said the property would be removed from the list after the payment cleared and the county completed its update. She advised me not to wait until the final day. I asked for copies of the account history, the address change, and the unpaid notices. She printed each page and stamped the date at the bottom. Before I left, she lowered her voice. "Mr. Mercer, someone called last week asking when bidders could inspect the property." I asked whether the caller gave a name. She said no, but the person knew the parcel number and asked whether machinery inside the building would remain after the sale. The orange tags came back to me then. They were not hanging from forgotten scrap. They were tied to machines that customers expected me to return. I drove home instead of going to the transport yard. Darren already knew I had the notice. I did not need to tell him what the county had shown me. At the kitchen table, I opened the bottom drawer where I kept the blue work order book from the shop. June had chosen that system years earlier. Every machine had a signed page, a serial number, and a blue copy that stayed bound in the book. I found the page for the tractor from Calvin. Then I found 5 more for machines I had seen through the workshop window. They all belonged to other people. At the bottom of the county payment history, the first missed installment carried a date only 4 days after the mailing address had been changed. Calvin called before I finished sorting the blue work orders. "Walter, I need to see you before noon, not at the shop." We met at Miller's Diner near the county road. Calvin was already in the back booth with his coffee untouched. He had known me since we were both young men taking night shifts at the parts plant. He was not easily hurried, and he was not a man who asked for private meetings without a reason. I placed the county copies on the table but kept the blue work order book in my coat. Calvin looked toward the front window before he spoke. "Nicole was at your shop Saturday morning." I asked what she was doing. She had a measuring wheel and a clipboard. She walked the road frontage twice, then measured from the south fence to the rear corner. Darren came later with a ring of new keys. Calvin had stopped because he wanted to check the progress on his tractor. Nicole told him I was resting and Darren was taking over the business side. Calvin asked when I had decided that. Nicole said the family was making changes before someone got hurt. I told Calvin about the new lock and the orange tags. He nodded once. I saw those. She had a list with the same numbers. She would read a number from the tag, then write something beside it. She also took pictures of the serial plates. Calvin knew where those plates were located because he had repaired equipment most of his life. Some were easy to find. Others were under seats, behind panels, or beneath years of grease. Nicole would not have found all of them without help. I asked whether Darren was with her while she took the pictures. Not the whole time. He showed her the first few, then left to answer a call. She kept going. That difference mattered. Darren knew the machinery. Nicole knew the property. Calvin finally lifted his coffee, then set it down without drinking. She asked me how many days you still worked. I told her 4 most weeks. She asked whether customers stayed while you repaired things. I said no, not unless they enjoyed standing around in the cold. I asked what else she wanted to know, whether trucks could turn around behind the building, whether the drainage ditch flooded, whether the county had ever widened the road. She was not asking about a repair shop. I looked past him toward the diner window. Outside, a grain truck rolled through the intersection and turned north. She was studying the land. Calvin said that was how it looked to him. He also told me Darren had been speaking differently about the shop for months. At the fuel station, Darren had said I was slowing down and might close before winter. At the feed store, he told a man from Rushsylvania that I no longer took large jobs. Neither statement was true. Darren had not asked how much work I had. He had told other people there was less of it. Calvin rubbed one thumb along the edge of his coffee cup. I should have called you Saturday. I asked why he had not. His grandson Eli drove for Darren. The job paid better than the warehouse and kept Eli home most nights. Calvin did not want a disagreement between old men to cost the boy his work. That was the risk I had expected once he asked to meet away from the shop. I told him I did not blame him. He looked relieved for a moment, then more troubled. There is more. On Sunday afternoon, Calvin drove past the shop on his way back from his sister house. A flatbed tow truck was backed through the gate. A man stood beside it with a sheet of paper. Nicole was near the workshop door. Calvin pulled into the lot and asked whether my business was moving equipment. The driver said he had been sent to collect 2 units for storage. Nicole stepped in before he could say which ones. She told Calvin the pickup had been scheduled and asked him not to block the entrance. Calvin asked whether I had approved it. Nicole said Darren was handling everything now. Then Calvin walked to the rear of the flatbed and read the numbers written on the paper clipped to the driver's board. One matched the orange tag on his tractor. He told the driver the machine belonged to him and would not be leaving without his permission. The driver looked at Nicole. Nicole looked at Darren, who had just come from inside the shop. Darren said there had been a mistake in the list. The flatbed left empty. I asked whether Calvin remembered the company name. He did not. The truck door was muddy and the lettering was small. He remembered only that the driver carried a folder with a dark green stripe across the top. Calvin reached into his jacket and removed his phone. I took one picture before they saw me. The photograph showed the rear half of the tow truck, Nicole near the workshop door, and Darren walking toward the gate. The image was not sharp, but the orange tags were visible on 2 machines inside the building. Calvin enlarged the corner of the picture. A sheet of paper rested on the flatbed rail. Near the top was a printed block of text. The first word was north. The second word was partly covered by the driver's hand. I asked Calvin to send the photograph to me and keep the original. He did both before we left the booth. Then I showed him the county payment history and explained the changed mailing address. I did not tell him what I planned because I had not decided yet. I only asked whether he would be willing to repeat what he saw if a lawyer or county worker needed to hear it. He looked toward the front counter, where 2 men from the feed store were eating lunch. Eli may lose his job. I said that was possible. Calvin folded his hands on the table. Then Darren should have thought about Eli before he used my tractor in whatever this is. That was the first time anyone besides me had said the matter was not a misunderstanding. Before we left, Calvin remembered one more detail. The folder Nicole carried on Saturday had the same dark green stripe as the paper on the tow truck. Near the bottom, in small print, he had seen 2 words, North Ridge. I drove home and searched the name in the county business directory. Several results appeared, but only one had been created recently. Northridge Storage. Darren and Nicole came to my house the next morning with a folder thick enough to require both of her hands. I had not invited them. Nicole set the folder on the kitchen table and removed 3 documents. Darren remained standing near the back door. He looked tired, but not surprised to see the county copies beside my coffee cup. Nicole said, "We can still keep this from becoming a public mess." I asked her what kind of mess she expected. She tapped the first document. This lets Darren deal with the county, the insurance company, and anyone holding equipment at the property. It is temporary. The heading called it an authorization for management and disposition of business assets. Below that, the shop was described as no longer conducting regular operations. I read the paragraph twice. The shop had 6 active work orders. 2 machines were waiting for parts. A customer from West Liberty had called the night before to ask when I could inspect a hydraulic pump. I asked Nicole, who told her the business had stopped operating. She said the language came from a standard form. I turned to Darren. He said, "Dad, the wording is not important. We need room to deal with the tax problem." The wording gave him authority to move property, speak for me, and sign storage agreements. It also stated that I had voluntarily stopped taking new work. I placed the document back on the table. Nicole pushed the second page toward me. "This one only confirms the inventory." The list showed tractors, engines, welding equipment, tool cabinets, and several machines that belonged to customers. Each item carried a number matching the orange tags. The tractor from Calvin was listed as Unit 17. Beside, it was a value higher than the repair bill and lower than what the machine would bring at auction. I asked why customer property had been valued. Nicole said the numbers were for insurance exposure. I told her insurance companies identify ownership before assigning value. She folded her hands. "That is exactly why we need you to sign. Once everything is organized, we can separate what belongs to customers." The blue work order book already separated it. Nicole had been inside the shop long enough to photograph serial plates, but she had not opened the drawer beside the main desk where the book had always been kept. Darren pulled out a chair and sat across from me. "We are trying to give you options. If the county moves forward, strangers will be walking through the building. This lets us control the process," I asked when the documents had been prepared. Nicole said the previous afternoon. At the bottom of the authorization, beneath the name of the document company, a small print line carried a preparation date. It was 6 days earlier. That was 2 days before the county mailed the auction notice and 10 days after the locks had been ordered. I turned the page so Darren could see the date. He looked at Nicole. She said the form had been started earlier because they knew the taxes might be late. I asked how they knew. Darren leaned back and rubbed both hands over his face. I was looking at the accounts. I knew money was tight. The shop account was not tight. I had seen the balance that morning. The unpaid taxes had not resulted from a lack of money. They had resulted from somebody choosing not to send it. I asked Darren why he had not used the shop account to pay the bill. He said he did not want to move funds without talking to me. He had changed my mailing address, changed my contact number, ordered new locks, and allowed Nicole to value customer machines. His caution had arrived at the exact place where payment would have protected my property. Nicole slid the third document forward. It granted Darren permission to use the workshop yard for storage and transportation activity. The term lasted 1 year and could be extended with written agreement from either party. Either party meant Darren could extend his own use after I signed. I closed the folder. Nicole said, "Walter, nobody is taking anything from you. Darren needs flexibility, and you need help. Signing today gives the family time." I asked what Darren needed the yard for. He said some of his trailers had to be moved from a leased lot. I'd passed that lot 3 days earlier. It was half empty. I asked whether he had lost a contract. His eyes shifted toward Nicole. She answered for him. "One customer changed carriers. That happens in transportation." I asked which customer. Darren told her to let him speak. Then he looked at me. Harlow Foods moved the route work to a larger company. It was most of our weekly mileage. Harlow Foods had supplied refrigerated products to schools and small groceries across 3 counties. Darren had handled those routes for nearly 4 years. Losing them would leave trucks idle, drivers short on hours, and loan payments unchanged. I understood then why Calvin had feared for the job held by Eli. I also understood why Darren wanted the workshop yard. He needed a place to park equipment without paying rent. More than that, he needed property that a lender might consider stable when his business no longer was. I asked when he lost the contract. He said the final notice came 8 months earlier. The mailing address on my county account had been changed 1 month later. Nicole said the timing did not prove anything. I agreed with her. It did not prove enough. I stood and carried the 3 documents to the counter by the telephone. I placed them beside the county history, not inside my drawer. Darren said, "Are you signing or not?" I told him I was not signing anything that described my business as closed or gave him control over property belonging to other people. He stood so quickly that the chair legs scraped the floor. "Then you need to understand what happens next. The county does not care how long you have owned that place. They will sell it." I said I understood the deadline. Nicole collected the folder but left the unsigned documents on the counter. She said, "Talk to someone before you make this harder than it needs to be." I told her I intended to. After they left, I called Dana Ellison. Dana had represented me years earlier when a customer claimed a repaired mower had damaged his barn. She had solved the practical part without pretending the disagreement was more complicated than it was. She listened while I described the changed address, the unpaid taxes, the new locks, the customer equipment, and the documents left in my kitchen. She asked me to bring every paper in the blue work order book to her office. I arrived before lunch. Dana read the authorization first. Then she compared the preparation date with the county notice and the account history. She said the documents did not transfer ownership, but signing them would create confusion about control and could make it easier for Darren to act as though I had stopped operating the shop. She told me not to sign, not to argue further, and not to remove anything from the building until we had a record of what was there. I showed her the photograph from Calvin and the county note about a caller asking whether machinery would remain after the sale. Dana asked whether Darren had business debts. I told her about the lost Harlow Foods contract. She searched public lending records and found liens against several transport trucks. None involved my workshop, but the dates showed new borrowing after the contract ended. Then I told her the name Calvin had seen, Northridge Storage. Dana opened the state business search on her computer. The company had been formed 6 weeks earlier. The organizer was Nicole Mercer. Dana printed the Northridge Storage filing and placed it beside the county payment history. The company address was the house shared by Darren and Nicole. The business purpose was listed as property development, vehicle storage, and equipment leasing. Dana pointed to the filing date. Nicole had formed the company 6 weeks earlier. That was after the first missed tax payment, but before the new lock appeared on my workshop. Dana called the county office while I sat across from her desk. She asked for the public rules governing the property auction and whether prospective bidders had to register in advance. The clerk told her registration had opened the previous month. A deposit was required before a bidder could inspect certain records or receive access instructions for occupied commercial property. Dana asked whether the bidder list was public. The clerk said completed registrations were available at the county administration building. We drove there in separate cars. The administration office stood behind the courthouse in a building that had once been a bank. The floor still had a dark line where the old teller counter had been removed. A clerk named Thomas Avery brought us a thin file and asked Dana to sign for it. The first page listed the workshop parcel, the unpaid balance, and the auction date. The second page showed 3 registered bidders. Northridge Storage was one of them. The registration date was 9 days before the county mailed the notice that reached my house. I read the line again. Nicole had registered a company to bid on my property before I knew the property was in danger. Dana asked Thomas when the bidder received the parcel information. He checked the file. The same day the registration was accepted. That information included the parcel map, road frontage, building size, tax balance, and the deadline for payment by the current owner. Nicole had measured the frontage after she already had a county map showing it. The measuring wheel had not been used to discover the size of the land. It had been used to plan something on it. Dana asked whether Northridge had requested an inspection. Thomas found a note attached to the back of the file. The company had asked whether the workshop could be inspected before the auction. The request had been denied because I still occupied the property and had not authorized entry. I told him someone had already entered, changed the locks, and tagged machines inside. Thomas looked at Dana. She said we were documenting the matter and did not need the county to make a legal conclusion. He made a copy of the inspection request and stamped it. The name on the request was Nicole Mercer. Outside the building, Dana stood beside my truck and read the page again. She said, "The county notice did not cause them to prepare. They were prepared before the notice was sent to you. That changed the first morning at the shop. Darren had not seen a tax problem and then changed the locks to protect the building. He had changed the locks while the problem remained hidden from me. Nicole had not started an inventory because the county might send strangers into the shop. She had registered herself as one of those strangers. We returned to Dana's office and searched the county planning records. Northridge had not submitted a full development application, but Nicole had requested a preliminary meeting about a storage yard on a parcel near the county road. The request did not list my address. It described the location by acreage, road access, and distance from the highway. The description matched the workshop. A rough drawing had been attached. It showed 2 rows of enclosed storage units where my building stood. Behind them were spaces for trailers and commercial vehicles. The south fence was marked for removal. The gravel lot was shown widened to the ditch. My workshop appeared only as an unlabeled rectangle. Dana enlarged the drawing. Near the bottom, a note referred to existing equipment to be removed before site preparation. I thought of the orange tags and the flatbed truck. They were not separating customer machines from mine. They were preparing to clear the rectangle. Dana called Thomas again and asked whether the bidder deposit information was public. He said the payment source was not part of the general file, but a registered bidder could provide permission for its release. A court order or formal dispute might also require it later. Dana said we did not need it yet. Then she asked whether Northridge had paid the deposit. Thomas confirmed that it had. The amount was large enough that a new company with no operating history would have needed money from somewhere else. I told Dana that Nicole worked as an office manager for a building supplier. She had income, but not enough to fund a development company and an auction deposit without help. Dana asked whether Darren Transport Business shared accounts with Nicole. I did not know, she said. The answer could wait. The more immediate problem was the workshop and the machines inside it. We drove there together. A locksmith met us in the gravel lot. Dana had arranged for him to open the door after reviewing the deed and my identification. She also asked Calvin to come, but not to enter until we had photographed the building. Darren was not there. The brass lock shone in the afternoon light. The locksmith examined it and said it had been installed recently. He photographed the brand and serial number before cutting it from the hasp. The door opened against a stack of empty wooden pallets that had not been there the week before. Dana entered first with her phone recording. I followed slowly. Orange tags hung from the machines in 2 rows. Each tag carried a number. Some also had a letter written in the corner. The workbench had been cleared except for a roll of tape, a marker, and a printed inventory sheet. Nicole had listed each machine by serial number, estimated value, condition, and transport requirement. She had divided them into 3 groups. Move first, move after inspection, leave until closing. The tractor from Calvin was in the first group. So was a red utility tractor owned by a widow named Margaret Sloan. Both had signed work orders in the blue book. Dana photographed every page of the inventory. Then she photographed the matching tags and serial plates. I opened the main desk drawer. The space where the blue work order book had been kept was empty. I had taken the book home before Darren changed the lock, but whoever searched the drawer had left the contents shifted and the pencils scattered. They had known there should be records. They simply had not known I had them. Calvin arrived and stood outside the open door until Dana told him he could enter. He walked directly to his tractor and removed the orange tag from the steering wheel. Dana asked him to leave it in place until she finished taking pictures. He tied it back without argument. Then he looked toward the rear of the shop. "Walter, where is the Ferguson?" The Ferguson belonged to Margaret Sloan. It had been parked beside the compressor while I waited for a fuel part. The space was empty. I checked the second row. Another space near the welding table was empty too. That machine belonged to a farmer named Owen Price. Dana compared the inventory with the photographs Calvin had taken on Sunday. Both tractors had been present then. Both were marked "Move First." I called Darren. He did not answer. I called Nicole. She let the call ring until it ended. Calvin walked to the rear door. Fresh tire marks crossed the dirt behind the building and continued toward the gate. Dana photographed them, then looked at the inventory sheet again. Beside the 2 missing tractors, Nicole had written the same destination, Northridge Temporary Storage. Dana told Calvin not to touch anything else until every tag, empty space, and tire mark had been photographed. I called Margaret Sloan first. She answered from her kitchen and said she had not authorized anyone to move the Ferguson. She had left it with me for a fuel problem and expected to pick it up before the end of the week. I told her the tractor was no longer in my building. She went quiet. Then she asked who had taken it. I said I was trying to find out. Margaret had known June and me for most of our married life. Her husband had bought that tractor when their youngest son was still in high school. After he died, Margaret used it to mow the back pasture and move firewood. She said, "Walter, I did not leave that machine with your son." I told her I understood. I called Owen Price next. His tractor was missing from the second row. He had dropped it off for a steering repair and had paid for the replacement parts in advance. Owen asked whether the shop had been robbed. I looked at the new lock lying on the gravel outside. I said someone had entered with a key. Dana stood near the workbench, writing down every call, every time, and every response. When I finished, she asked both customers to send a brief written statement saying they had not approved storage, transport, sale, or release to Darren or Nicole. Margaret said she would bring hers in person. Owen said he would email his before supper. Dana then called the county sheriff office on the non-emergency line. She explained that customer property had been moved from a business without permission and that we were documenting ownership before making a formal complaint. The deputy who answered said the ownership records would matter. He advised us not to enter any other property or attempt to recover the tractors ourselves. Dana gave him the serial numbers from the blue work order book. That book had stopped being a reminder of June. It had become the clearest record in the room. I opened it on the workbench and compared every orange tag with a signed page. 11 machines belonged to customers. 3 belonged to me. 2 were old parts tractors that had been sitting behind the shop for years. Nicole had valued all 16 as though they were one collection. Beside each number, she had written a transport cost and an estimated sale figure. The values were not for insurance. There was no policy number, no owner name, and no repair status. The sheet treated everything inside the building as property that could be moved, stored, or sold after the land changed hands. Darren arrived while Dana was photographing the blue copies. His truck came fast over the gravel and stopped close to the open door. He stepped out before the engine had fully settled. He looked at the cut lock, then at the locksmith, then at Calvin. He said, "You had no right to break into this place." I told him the deed still carried my name and the door still opened into my business. He turned to Dana. "This is a family matter." Dana said customer property had already made it more than that. Darren walked inside and saw the blue work order book on the bench. His face changed for only a second, but Calvin saw it too. I asked where the 2 tractors had gone. Darren said they'd been moved for protection. I asked protection from what? He said, "From the county, from liability, from you trying to work alone when you should not be doing this anymore." I pointed to the empty spaces. "Those machines did not belong to me." He said they would be returned after the situation was settled. Dana asked for the storage address. Darren told her Nicole handled the transport. She asked again. He looked at me. "Dad, this is exactly why I changed the locks. You do not understand what happens when a property goes into auction. People come through. Things disappear. Insurance refuses claims. I was keeping everything safe." I asked why Northridge Storage had registered to bid before the notice reached me. He did not answer. I asked why Nicole had prepared an inventory that listed customer machines as saleable assets. He said the word saleable was only part of a planning worksheet. I asked why the workshop had been described as closed when 6 jobs were active. He said, "Because it needs to close." The sentence settled into the building more heavily than any raised voice could have. Darren looked at the tools, the shelves, and the tractors as if they were already part of an empty room. He said the shop was not worth losing the transport company. He had drivers depending on him. He had truck loans, insurance payments, and contracts that might return if he could survive the season. I asked what my shop had to do with his trucks. He stepped closer. "The land is worth more than the building. You know that. If Northridge bought it at the county sale, we could refinance against the property, move the transport yard here, and build storage along the road. You would still be taken care of." I asked whether taken care of meant locked out. He said, "It meant you would not have to carry this anymore." I had believed for months that Darren saw my injured hand and feared I would hurt myself again. That belief ended while he stood in front of me and called my work something I carried for his sake. He had not changed the lock because I was weak. He had changed it because I was still strong enough to interfere. Nicole arrived 10 minutes later. She parked beside Darren and entered with her phone in one hand. She told him not to say anything else. Dana said that was good advice. Nicole looked at the inventory sheet on the bench. She said, "Those numbers were preliminary." Calvin asked whether his tractor was preliminary too. Nicole ignored him. She told me the county auction would happen unless I found the full balance quickly. She said North Ridge was the only practical way to keep the land connected to the family. I asked whether she had planned to tell me before bidding. She said they had planned to explain once they knew the project was possible. That meant after the address had been changed, after the tax had gone unpaid, after the company had been formed, after the bidder deposit had been made, after the locks had been replaced, and after the tractors had been moved. Dana asked Nicole to identify the temporary storage site. Nicole said her company rented space at an equipment yard outside town. Dana asked for the address. Nicole said she would provide it after reviewing the customer paperwork. I placed the blue book in front of her. The paperwork was already there. Nicole did not touch it. Darren told me the tax balance was more than I could cover without draining the shop. He said if I fought them, I could lose the property anyway and leave him with a failed company. There it was. My land had become his last available answer. I had helped Darren buy his first truck. I had covered an insurance payment when a transmission failed. I had let him use the workshop address when he needed a place to register the business. Each time he promised the help would carry him to stable ground. The ground never became stable because he kept building on the next favor. I walked past him to the rear corner of the shop. Under a canvas cover sat the blue Ford tractor I had spent 4 years restoring. It belonged to me. No customer had a claim on it. No lender had a lien on it. I had planned to keep it until I could no longer climb into the seat. Calvin followed me. He knew what I was thinking before I said it. He had offered to buy the Ford twice in the past year. I had refused both times. I removed the canvas and checked the tires, the paint, and the clean engine block. Then I told Calvin I was ready to sell. Darren said, "You cannot be serious." I told him the Ford would bring enough to pay the taxes and leave a small reserve for the shop. He said I was throwing away a valuable machine to save an old building. I said I was selling something I owned to protect something I owned. Calvin named a fair price without trying to lower it. Dana wrote the amount in her notes and said she could prepare a simple bill of sale that afternoon. Darren stepped between me and the tractor. "Dad, use that money in the transport company instead. Give me 60 days. If the roots come back, we can pay the taxes and keep everything." I looked at him standing beside a machine he had already counted in Nicole inventory. I said the county deadline was 19 days, not 60. He told me I was choosing the shop over my own son. I told him I was choosing not to lose the shop because of choices he had hidden from me. Nicole took Darren by the arm and led him toward the door. Before leaving, she said, the tractor sale would not fix the customer claims or the auction record. Dana said returning the missing machines would help. Nicole did not reply. Calvin stayed until his grandson called from the transport yard. Eli had been told not to report for work the next morning. Darren had said there was not enough freight to keep every driver moving. Calvin listened without speaking, then told Eli to come by the house. The cost had reached him sooner than either of us expected. That evening, Dana prepared the bill of sale. Calvin arranged payment through his bank. I signed the transfer and kept the Ford in the shop until I could complete one final inspection. Before I left, Margaret Sloan called again. Her nephew had driven past an equipment yard near the highway and seen a Ferguson behind the fence. The orange tag was still tied to the steering wheel. A green sign on the gate carried the name Northridge Storage. Calvin payment cleared the next morning. Dana met me at the county office before the doors opened. I carried the bill of sale, the tax balance sheet, and a bank check that covered the full amount. Marcia Keene entered the payment while I stood at her desk. She printed a receipt, stamped it, and removed the auction warning from the account. Then she called Thomas Avery in the administration office and told him the parcel had been paid before the deadline. Thomas asked me to wait while he updated the bidder file. 10 minutes later, he brought out a page showing the workshop property had been withdrawn from the auction list. Northridge Storage no longer had anything to bid on. Dana asked Thomas to confirm the dates one more time for the record. The mailing address had been changed 7 months earlier. The first tax payment had been missed 4 days later. Northridge had registered as a bidder 9 days before the notice was mailed to me. Nicole had requested inspection information before I knew the property was in danger. Thomas signed the copy and placed the county seal beside his name. I left the building with less money and more control than I had carried inside. At the workshop, the locksmith installed a new lock and gave every key to me. Dana photographed the work and recorded the serial number. I gave one key to Calvin for the afternoon because we needed another person present while customers inspected their machines. I kept the others in my coat pocket. Darren received none. Margaret arrived first with her nephew. She carried the signed statement Dana had requested and a photograph of the Ferguson behind the Northridge fence. Owen came 20 minutes later. Both wanted their tractors returned before any further repair work continued. I did not blame them. Dana sent Nicole a written demand for the storage address, transport records, and immediate return of the 2 machines. She copied Darren and the deputy who had taken our earlier report. Nicole answered within an hour. She said Northridge had moved the tractors only to protect them from an uncertain property process. She called the company a backup plan created for the benefit of the family. Dana replied that the property process was no longer uncertain. The taxes had been paid, the auction had been canceled, and the owners had never authorized removal. Nicole then provided the address. The equipment yard was outside town near the highway. It belonged to a man who rented fenced space to contractors and towing companies. He told Dana that Nicole had signed the storage agreement and Darren had arranged the transport. He also said no payment had been made beyond the first week. Dana asked him not to move either tractor again. The deputy met Margaret and Owen at the yard that afternoon. The serial numbers matched the blue work orders. Both machines were released to their owners after the transport company agreed to return them. Darren Transport Company had ordered the first move. Darren Transport Company paid for the return. That was the first cost he could not place on me. By evening, every customer with an orange tag had been called. Dana explained that the workshop remained open. The property was no longer scheduled for auction, and no machine would be moved without written approval from its owner. 3 customers collected their equipment anyway. 2 decided to leave their machines with me after reviewing the work orders and the new lock. Trust did not return all at once. It came back by individual decision. I spent the next morning separating the orange tags from the blue work orders. Each tag went into a paper envelope marked with the machine owner, the serial number, and the place where it had been found. The tags no longer controlled anything. They had become evidence. Darren arrived near noon. He parked outside the gate and waited until I walked to him. He looked toward the new lock. "You changed it again." I said I had. He asked whether the county had accepted the payment. I gave him a copy of the withdrawal notice. He read it in the front seat of his truck. His shoulders dropped when he reached the county stamp. Then he asked how much money remained from the Ford sale. I told him enough to cover shop expenses and complete the repairs already promised. He said his company could survive if he had help with 2 truck payments and the insurance renewal. I reminded him that he had used company money to prepare a bid on my property. He said Northridge had paid the deposit. Dana had asked Nicole for the bidder receipt as part of the records connected to the storage dispute. Nicole sent a packet intended to show that Northridge was a separate company. The receipt showed otherwise. The deposit had been transferred from the operating account of Darren Mercer Transport. So had the planning fee and the first payment to the equipment yard. I handed him a copy. He looked at the account number and folded the page in half. Nicole was going to pay it back after financing. I asked what financing. He said the project lender wanted control of the land before considering the storage plan. Once Northridge owned the workshop parcel, the property could support a larger loan. That loan would have covered construction and part of his transport debt. My unpaid taxes had been the entrance to their financing plan. Darren said, "We were trying to keep everything in the family. I told him they were trying to move ownership inside the family without asking the person who owned it. He stared through the windshield. Then, he said the trucks might be taken within a month. I believed him. The loss of the Harlow contract had not caused one bad week. It had opened a hole he had covered with loans, delayed payments, and money taken from one business to support another. He asked me again for the money left from the Ford. I said no. He said Calvin had paid enough to save both companies. I told him Calvin paid enough to save the workshop from a problem Darren had helped create. His face tightened. You would let my business fail over this. I said his business would fail or survive because of decisions made inside his business. For years, I had treated every crisis around Darren as a test of whether I loved him enough. That day, I treated it as a question of authority. He had authority over his company. I had authority over my money. He left without another word. Late that afternoon, Nicole sent Dana another email. She said Northridge would cooperate with the return of all customer property, but she objected to the suggestion that the equipment had been intended for sale. Attached was a planning packet prepared for the project lender. Dana printed it and brought it to the shop. The first pages showed the storage buildings and trailer spaces. The final page was labeled Asset Recovery After Property Transfer. Every customer machine marked with an orange tag appeared on the list. Beside each one was an estimated amount available through sale, salvage, or storage lien. At the bottom, the total had been added to the value of the land. They had not only planned to buy my workshop before I received the notice, they had planned to make the first loan payment with machines that had never belonged to them. The two missing tractors came back on a gray morning with road dust on their tires and the orange tags still tied to the steering wheels. Margaret Sloan stood beside the Ferguson while the driver lowered it from the flatbed. She checked the serial plate against the blue copy in my work order book, then walked around the tractor without speaking. Owen did the same with his machine. The driver handed Dana 2 transport receipts. The first move had been ordered by Darren Mercer Transport. The return had been charged to the same company after the equipment yard refused to release either tractor without payment. Margaret untied the orange tag from her steering wheel and gave it to Dana. She said, "Keep this with the rest." Owen removed his tag too. Calvin arrived before the flatbed left. He helped me line up the returned machines inside the shop, then stood with Margaret and Owen while I explained what work had been completed and what still remained. Margaret decided to take the Ferguson home. Owen left his tractor with me long enough to finish the steering repair. Neither decision felt like forgiveness or punishment. They were practical judgments made by people who had brought me property and expected me to protect it. That was what Darren and Nicole had failed to understand. The machines were not numbers waiting to be converted into money. Each one belonged to someone who had handed me a key, described a problem, and trusted that the same machine would be there when the work was done. By noon, every orange tag had been removed. Dana placed them in separate envelopes and carried the envelopes to her office. She also took the planning packet, the county records, the photographs from Calvin, and copies of every blue work order. The evidence no longer depended on one document. The county history showed when the address changed. The bidder file showed when Northridge prepared to buy. The photograph from Calvin showed the machines tagged before I knew about the auction. The work orders showed who owned them. The transport receipts showed who moved them. The lender packet showed what Nicole expected the machines to become after the property changed hands. No single page told the whole story. Together, they left very little room for another version. Darren came to the shop after 3 that afternoon. He parked outside the gate and walked in without trying the new lock. That was the first sign that something had changed. He waited beside the open door until I looked up from the workbench. Calvin was checking the lights on the Ford before taking it home. He saw Darren and started to leave. Darren said, "You can stay." Calvin looked at me. I nodded. Darren stepped inside and studied the empty places where the orange tags had been. He said Nicole had withdrawn the planning request for Northridge. The company would not pursue the storage project. I asked whether the bidder deposit had been returned. He said part of it would be kept as an administrative fee. I asked whether the transport company could afford that loss. He did not answer immediately. Then he said 2 trucks had already been surrendered to the lender. Eli and another driver had been laid off. A 3rd truck would probably be taken before the end of the month. Calvin lowered the hood of the Ford. Darren looked at him. "I am sorry about Eli," Calvin said. "You should tell him that." Darren nodded. There was no argument in him that afternoon. He seemed smaller without Nicole beside him, though he was still a broad man and 20 years younger than I was. He walked to the main desk and touched the edge of the blue work order book. I asked why he had moved it from the drawer. He said he had searched the desk after changing the lock. He wanted the customer records before the tow truck arrived. I told him the book had already been at my house. He said he knew that now. I asked what he would have done if he had found it. He looked toward the 2 returned tractors. Nicole said we needed to separate customer property before the sale. The lender packet did not separate it. He said the first version had been broader than it should have been. I waited. Darren put both hands on the desk. Then he said, "I knew what was on the list." Calvin remained near the Ford, silent. Darren told me Nicole believed most customers would not act quickly enough to stop the machines from being moved. Once Northridge controlled the building, she planned to send notices saying storage charges had begun. Machines that remained unclaimed would strengthen the project balance sheet. I asked whether he believed that was legal. He said Nicole believed it could be handled. That was not the same answer. I asked whether he knew Calvin Tractor was on the first transport list. He said yes. I asked whether he knew Margaret Tractor had belonged to her husband. He closed his eyes briefly. He said yes again. The deepest part of the betrayal was not that Darren had failed to understand what the machines meant. He had understood. He had simply decided his need was greater. He said, "I kept thinking I could fix the transport company before you found out. If Northridge bought the land, we could refinance. Once the roots came back, I planned to give you a place to work in one of the new buildings." I asked whether I would have owned that building. He said Northridge would have owned the property, but the family would still control it. I asked which member of the family. He looked down. Nicole. There it was. Darren had not only planned to take control from me. He had planned to place that control in the hands of someone whose project depended on the workshop disappearing. He said Nicole thought I would never agree to sell while I was still working. She was right. He said that was why they needed the county process. If the auction moved forward, I would have to accept that the decision had been made by circumstances instead of by them. The unpaid taxes were not only a way to lower the purchase price, they were meant to make the loss look unavoidable. I asked why he had not come to me when the Harlow contract ended. His answer came quietly. "Because you would have asked to see the books. I would have." He said the books would have shown that he had used short-term loans to cover truck payments before the contract was officially gone. They would have shown fuel bills paid late, insurance premiums divided across cards, and money transferred between accounts without a plan to replace it. He did not want me to see that the business had been failing while he was still telling people it was growing. Calvin said, "So you let people think your father was the one who could not manage?" Darren looked at him. Yes. That answer cost him more than any excuse would have. He had told customers I was slowing down because it made his own decline harder to see. He had described my shop as nearly closed because his company was the business running out of time. I asked about the lock. He said he ordered it before Northridge registered for the auction. Nicole needed access for photographs and measurements. They also needed to keep me from moving equipment or finding the inventory sheets before the bidder file was complete. The brass lock had never been about insurance. It had been the first physical step in removing me from the decision. Darren reached into his jacket and placed a folded paper on the desk. It was not another management authorization. It was a proposal giving me a minority share in the transport company in exchange for enough money to pay the insurance renewal and bring 1 truck loan current. He said the amount was less than what remained from the Ford sale and the shop reserve together. I did not touch the paper. He said, "I am not asking you to give me the money. I am asking you to invest. You would see the books. You would have assigned interest in the company." That was different from the requests he had made before. It was also an offer made only after the hidden plan had failed. Calvin picked up the keys to the Ford and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he said, "Walter, the tractor can stay here until tomorrow. You have something else to decide." Darren waited beside the desk. The blue work order book lay between us, open to a page carrying the name of Owen Price. Beside it rested the proposal for Darren Company. One record represented work people had trusted me to complete. The other asked whether trust could be rebuilt by turning another family emergency into a business agreement. I folded the proposal once and placed it in my coat pocket. Then I told Darren I would give him my answer the next morning. Darren was waiting beside his truck when I reached the workshop the next morning. I unlocked the door and carried his proposal to the workbench. He followed me inside but stopped before the desk. I placed the paper beside the blue work order book. I told him I had read every page. The proposal gave me a small share of the transport company and access to its records. It also allowed the company to repay my money only after its secured lenders had been paid. That meant I would carry the risk while the banks remained ahead of me. Darren said the company still had customers and equipment. He believed one new regional contract could keep the remaining trucks on the road. I told him belief was not a payment plan. He looked toward the open workshop door. Then he said, "I thought you might say that." I told him I would not invest in the transport company. I would not lend against the workshop. I would not sign any guarantee, transfer any land, or give him access to my accounts. He pressed his lips together and nodded once. I also told him the answer did not mean I wanted him to fail. It meant the failure could no longer be moved onto property that belonged to me or machines that belonged to my customers. He asked whether Dana had advised me to refuse. I said Dana had explained the paper. The decision belonged to me. That mattered to him. I could see it in the way he lowered his head. For months, he had described me as a man whose decisions needed to be made by someone else. Now he had to hear the decision directly from me. I removed 3 keys from my pocket and placed them on the bench. One opened the front door, one opened the rear gate, one opened the parts room. I told him none of them would be his. He said he understood. I told him he could call me. He could come to the house, he could sit at my kitchen table, he could speak about the trucks, the lost contract, or the men who no longer had work. He could not ask for money, land, signatures, keys, or control. He looked at the brass lock hanging from the nail above the desk. The locksmith had returned it after cutting it from the door. I had left it open. Darren said, "What about Nicole?" I told him Nicole had no place in the business. She could not enter the building, contact customers, move equipment, or represent herself as acting for me. He said she believed I had embarrassed her by giving the lender packet to Dana. I told him Nicole had written the packet. What embarrassed her was seeing other people read it. Darren walked to the place where the Ferguson had stood before it was moved. He said Nicole was closing North Ridge. The planning fees and lost deposit had used most of the money she had saved. She had returned to her regular job and was speaking to a lawyer about separating her finances from the transport company. I did not ask what that meant for their marriage. That was another matter he would have to face without using my property as shelter. Calvin arrived with his grandson Eli shortly after 9. Eli had come to help move the Ford to the farm. He avoided looking at Darren until Darren crossed the floor and stood in front of him. Darren said, "I should have told you earlier that the roots were gone. I kept you working without knowing whether I could pay another full week." Eli said he had found temporary work with a grain hauler. Darren nodded. Then he apologized for placing Calvin in the middle of the dispute. Calvin listened without rescuing him from the silence afterward. Finally, he said, "You need to tell the other driver too." Darren said he would. That was the only repair available between them that morning. It was small, but it required Darren to do something instead of explain what he had intended. Calvin drove the Ford out of the workshop after I completed the final inspection. The engine settled into a steady rhythm as he crossed the gravel lot. I watched it go without regret. The tractor had been mine to sell. The money had paid the taxes, restored the account, and kept the property out of the auction. Losing it had not made me poorer in the way Darren expected. It had bought back the right to decide what remained. Dana arrived before noon with copies of the final county records and the return receipts for the tractors. She confirmed that the parcel had been removed from every public auction list. The mailing address and contact number were mine again. The equipment yard had closed the Northridge account. No storage claim remained against Margaret or Owen. Darren Transport Company still owed the return fees. Dana said the company would have to handle those charges with its other debts. I signed a new access instruction stating that no one could change the county account without written confirmation from me. Dana kept a copy. I placed the original in the metal cabinet beside the work orders. Then she left me to open the shop. Owen arrived with a box of steering parts. He had decided to let me finish the repair. Margaret came later with a jar of apple butter and the fuel fitting I had ordered before her tractor was moved. She did not speak about Darren or Nicole. She asked when I expected the Ferguson to be ready. I gave her a day and a time. That ordinary promise meant more than an apology made for appearance. By the end of the week, 4 machines were back in their places. 2 new customers had called after hearing that the workshop remained open. Calvin sent a man from his church with an old mower that would not stay running. Darren called once on Sunday evening. He said one lender had agreed to take 2 trucks without pursuing the remaining balance immediately. The company would continue with 1 vehicle while he looked for work as a dispatcher. He did not ask me for help. I told him he could come for supper the following week. He said he would call before coming. That was where our relationship stood. The door was not closed, the keys were not shared. On Monday morning, I opened the blue work order book to a clean page. A farmer named Samuel Harris stood at the counter while I wrote the serial number from his tractor and the repair he wanted completed. He signed beneath the description. I tore out his copy and left the blue sheet bound inside the book. Above the desk, the old brass lock hung open from a nail. Outside, the Ford engine carried across the gravel as Calvin drove past the shop and lifted one hand from the wheel. I closed the work order book, placed it beside my tools, and went back to work.